Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to one of the last breakout session of today's NATO Youth Summit. My name is Alex Martin, and I'm the head of GlobSec Brussels office, one of the major think tanks from Central and Eastern Europe based out of Slovakia, Bratislava. And I'm delighted to be moderating today the session on partnering for peace, NATO's role in the rules-based multilateral order. As new challenges such as the hybrid warfare, climate crisis, the pandemic, we all touched upon it already today, have demonstrated political military cohesion and effectiveness are threatened by myriad of variables, including non-military ones. And China was brought time and again into the conversation, and its increasing influence in Europe poses both threats and challenges for the alliance and its allies. Regional conflicts also continue to stir disunity and threaten the multilateral cooperation. And now more than ever, collective action is necessary, and many onlookers, such as those like myself working in the think tank area, are eager to see how NATO will respond to current and future challenges, how it will uphold and strengthen a rules-based order. And in this regard, NATO's relationships with its partners represent a unique platform for demonstrating the needed global resilience and adherence to the rules-based order. What type of engagement with partners that share the alliance's values and common purpose will be a good fit for the future multilateral cooperation. And I'm joined today by Ketevan Chumbadze, Deputy Political Director at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Georgia, Annelie Gregor, Political Advisor to the Ministry of Defense, Kingdom of Sweden, and Malcolm Jorgensen, Research Fellow and Lecturer at Leuphana University in Luneburg. Before we kick off, I just want to remind everyone to use the Q&A button on the left side of your screen to submit your questions to the speakers, and note that this function is available to registered participants only. And I want to kick off the conversation with a very big question to my panelists. And I will start with Ketevan. What are the biggest challenges to today's rules-based order?
Thank you. I would like to first greet our distinguished audience from Tbilisi, Georgia, the aspirant country of the NATO. And also herewith, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the organizers, to the NATO and the Munich Security Conference for this inclusiveness and bringing women to this very important event, because this year marks the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council resolution on women, peace and security, and I'm really very happy and glad to see such great involvement of women and youth in discussion on the future of the future of the transatlantic alliance. Regarding the topic of our discussion and regarding the rules-based international order and multilateralism, let me first and foremost concentrate of the importance of the fundamental norms and principles of the international law, which are creating the fundamentals and the basics of peace and security throughout the world. And while today's international system is greatly undermined, I would like to zoom in on the Black Sea and eastern flank of Europe, because this is the region which really faced the drastic and very negative consequences of violation and undermining the rules-based international order. And what we see on the ground in this Black Sea region, which is really crucial for NATO and for transatlantic relations, this is the violation and forcible change of international borders. And we have seen that in 2008 and in 2014 by illegal occupation of two Georgian regions of Abkhazia and Skin Valley region, South Ossetia, illegal annexation of Crimea, and activities in eastern Ukraine, hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and all these really greatly violate the rules-based international order. And while we are witnessing today intensive militarization of the Black Sea in follow-up of this aggression, and also provocation and hostile activities. against the NATO member states, also the provocative steps, hybrid warfare tactics. This all means that what is happening in the Black Sea region, what is happening here, this is not only against Georgia or Ukraine. This is violating and undermining the entire Euro-Atlantic security and peace and stability in this region. And that is why the Russian Federation in this region, all these activities, what the Russian Federation is doing, this is directed against the bond and against the unity of transatlantic alliance and testing the West and the shared values of the West.
Thank you, Ketevan. I will follow up on that one after this first round, but I want to go to Annelie and ask her what are, in her views or from the Scandinavian point of view, the biggest challenges to the rules-based order today.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you for hosting this. A big thanks to the General Secretary, Jens Stoltenberg, for including the Enhanced Opportunities Partners in this as well. I think it's clear that we live in unpredictable times with new challenges and threats. Sure, we are witnessing increasingly challenging security situation both globally, but especially in our vicinity, in the Baltic Sea and in the Arctic. And this is happening, of course, while we're experiencing a pandemic with profound impact on our societies. But I think it's important to be very clear on why the European security order is under challenge. We still face a Russia that is showing willingness to use military force, as we have seen in Georgia, as we have seen in Ukraine. And they do this to pursue political goals with military means then. And I think it's important to be very clear on this and say that, just because time has passed, it's been 6 years since the illegal annexation, we cannot just accept this. This is the greatest challenge to the European security order since the Second World War. And Russian actions against Ukraine go beyond aggression. They constitute, and towards Georgia as well, they constitute a threat to the rights of countries in Russia's neighborhood to make policy choices of their own. So 6 years after the illegal annexation, we still face a Russia that breaks international law. Adding to this, we see in our own neighborhood Russia that has a military buildup, including nuclear weapons in our vicinity. We have seen an increasing military presence in the Arctic, and they continue to conduct hybrid operations and activities against other states. So I think this is a reality that we have to face today, but also tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Annelie. Malcolm, to you, from a further away perspective in the Pacific, what are, in your views, the biggest challenges of today's rules-based order? Is it just about the breaking of the international norms by actors such as Russia, or there are other challenges that we should consider?
Yes, thank you very much, Alex, and to the other speakers and organizers of this conference. I would take a broader approach of thinking about what do we mean by the rules-based international order to understand the magnitude of the problems we face, and that it really comes down to a fragmentation of the international legal foundations of the rules-based order along geopolitical and ideological lines. And this has become critical. So what do I mean by this? It's that in one interpretation of the rules-based order, we could think of the liberal rules-based order where human rights and democracy are central to that. Because of the contestation over that, there has been a move to try and have a more presumed technical description of the order in terms of we're referring to a hierarchy of legal and non-legal rules. And it's about upholding these agreed ways of behaving between states. That's what we mean by the rules-based order. However, I would suggest that the rules of international law, which are presumed to be the most authoritative and determinate part of the rules-based order, that sit at its foundation and hold up the rest of the order, that those international laws are now being fragmented in ways that make the entire order unstable. So if we think of the most consequential international security challenges over the last 20 years, the United States-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, ongoing Chinese actions in the South China Sea, excessive maritime claims, Russia's actions in Crimea. In each of these cases, what has been most destructive and most subversive is that the lawyers from these countries have not simply said that they are breaching international law and don't care about that. In each case, the lawyers have defended strongly their country's behavior in terms of international law. And so when there is this fragmentation of even the meaning of law, what is supposed to be the more certain and authoritative and clear part of the order, when that is then contested by the lawyers of each of these countries, then the entire concept of a rules-based order with shared geopolitical and ideological bases becomes problematic. And then there is no longer a rules-based basis for resolving the most consequential of international disputes.
And if I could follow up on that, Malcolm, so in that sense, then what is the best course of action for responding to international actors that don't respect the rules-based international order, or the ones that try to fragment it? How should we respond as international community?
Well, it's very difficult because it's precisely this idea of international community that has been contested as well. That is that an effective rules-based order, any global order, requires some kind of stable equilibrium, if you like, between a particular structure of global power and a particular set of ideas and norms and values about what global order we actually want to see. When these two things are stable and in equilibrium, then we can all have what you might think of as a more universal global order, rules-based order. But at this point, power is being fragmented. The relative decline of the United States, the relative decline of China, increase of Chinese power, for instance. And at the same time, there is this contestation of the values of international law, both between these great powers and increasingly within liberal democracies themselves. You can see in some of the leading members of the so-called rules-based order that these are being contested. And so it's about fortifying the agreement on what the values are, as well as having a stable, effective basis of power. I mean, and this goes to the heart of the NATO project, of having both effective power and an agreed set of basic values for global order.
So until we get to that stable equilibrium, I think that there are more and more conversations on how to make NATO more of a global alliance, incorporating more voices. So Annelie, to you, what are the concrete steps that NATO could take in this regard to become an even more global alliance, and whether or not Scandinavia or the Caucasus regions could be examples of progress in this area? And if so, how would that look like?
I think it's important for NATO to work with like-minded partners as a way to uphold the liberal order. I mean, on the one hand, it's important to upgrade military capability in new technologies and so on as AI and cyber. But on the other hand, it's also important to uphold a sense of being a shared community. And sure, the heart of NATO is the hardware, but it's also having a shared security community. And one way to do that is, of course, to continue to do these large-scale exercises that we have seen with Trident Juncture, with bolt-ups, and so on. And the thing about exercising together, it's not only upholds the multilateral cooperation, they bring stability, it sends a good security signal, and of course strengthens interoperability and builds common norms. But I think the most important is that for NATO then, to be more concrete, is to also work on the strategic communication on why we want to uphold the liberal order and defend the European security order. And Jens Stoltenberg has said this so cleverly that there's a paradox in this. If NATO were to be a politician, then it wouldn't be very good, because politicians have a tendency to talk a lot but not bring a lot of substance. NATO, on the other hand, brings a lot of substance when it comes to capabilities and what we do, but not so much in talking about it or spreading the message. So just more of strategic communications and all the things we do. And the final point is also to include smaller multilateral formats with NATO. That could be the Joint Expeditionary Force or the EI2, the French-led initiative, or other regional corporations. Work more, bring us closer together with regional formats.
Ketevan, Annelie just mentioned that yes, the heart of NATO remains the hardware, but we need to put the software on top, and the political role is ever more important. So in your view, how could NATO play a more effective political role in bringing regional conflicts to peaceful conclusions? And I'm looking particularly at the active conflicts in the immediate neighborhood, such as those in Georgia, Nagorno-Karabakh, or Ukraine.
Thank you very much. While we are considering and discussing the future role of the NATO and the reflection process, also, I think that the first what we have to acknowledge and admit is what is the purpose of all these activities and violation of the rules-based order by the Russian Federation. And I think that we need to understand that all these violations are serve projecting power beyond the wide Black Sea and into the Mediterranean and the Middle East. And that is why I think that the NATO, which is considered to be stronger politically and globally, also need to take more greater leadership in that regard and develop probably proactive strategic vision on the wider Black Sea region. And in that regard, I would like also to focus on the open door policy of the transatlantic alliance, which still, which it was and is the most effective and successful tools for which has also a destabilizing effect on the wider region. And in case of Georgia, I think that in 10 years, if we will see Georgia as a member of the NATO, this will be really the crucial step in terms of stabilizing the Black Sea and bringing more peace and security in the Black Sea. And probably also the greater engagement of the NATO in the Black Sea would also serve as the important step in terms of bringing the more shared values into the region, the liberty and democracy, which is the core for peace and stability in this region and in the wider Euro-Atlantic arena. And key issue when we talk about the greater and global leadership, I think that the most important issue is defending the principles, and because this is what multilateralism is about, and defending the principles, taking greater stance, principled stance vis-a-vis the violation and undermining the rules-based international order could be the main pillar and the main step to counter this kind of destabilizing steps by one of the actors in the region.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ketevan. And this is a perfect segue to a China question that I had in mind, but also that is present among those that are following us. And we have a question from Ionela Cholan from Romania. As the US foreign policy moves its focus towards Asia Pacific, how do the European allies and partners see the rising global ambitions of China? And I would add to that, to what extent we have some opportunities that the alliance could seize upon when it comes to the rising of China, or a new type of relationship between NATO allies and China. And maybe I'll start with you, Malcolm.
Yes, thanks. So, I mean, one of the objectives of NATO going forward is that it's identified for itself is that it needs to be a more international organization. But in order for that to be true, and I think that there's a good argument for that, we need to refocus in on interests, because ultimately it's the interests of the member states of NATO that matters. And so it's the nature of the modern challenges that the NATO countries face, that it's no longer just regional challenges that are going to matter. But there's international challenges such as those in the Asia Pacific region are encroaching on what are the core interests of NATO states. And so, yes, it clearly is the case that China is rising in its own region, that international law has been disrupted in that way that will be very difficult to put back to as the situation it was previously. And so the question for NATO countries is does that go to their core interests, given that traditionally this alliance was very much about European security. And I think the answer is that clearly the nature and the concept of the rules-based international order indicates the way that these challenges now are global in scope, that the entire concept of international institutions and a common set of international rules, as that fragments, it's something that NATO must engage with. And so, yes, these previously regional shifts in power become of global concern to an institution like NATO.
Annelie, how is that seen from Sweden when it comes to the relationship with China and the rising influence of China?
It's no secret that China has challenged norms and the role of multilateral institutions and so on. And we have seen issues on the 5G side as well when it comes to China's aspirations to buy critical infrastructure in our region. Of course, another obvious statement is that neither China nor Russia shares the Western values, and these issues do confront NATO as well as other organizations, of course, which means that NATO allies and its partners must show a cohesion and stand up for its interests, just like Malcolm discussed, and protect the liberal order, the European security order, and international law.
Ketevan, to you as well, because China is having a growing influence also in the Caucasus region. So how is that seen from the other side of the Black Sea?
So Georgia is cooperating with China and on the basis of the respect of sovereignty and territorial integrity of each other, and cooperating in different fields, economics mostly. And I think that when we are talking about this great power balancing and also the challenges, we need also to really keep the focus on the greater challenges that the European Euro-Atlantic space is facing. And in that regard, I would like to really focus this attention and the focus on the challenges in the Black Sea region, which is first and foremost coming and stemming from our Georgia's northern neighbor.
I want from all of you for a question from the audience, a yes or no answer, because we have about 5 minutes and I want to wrap it up with some brainstorming. But first, should NATO focus more on partnerships with like-minded countries in the Asia-Pacific region? Yes or no? I'll start with you, Ketevan.
Yes.
Annelie?
Yes and no.
Malcolm?
Yes, but I probably agree with Annelie that it's quite complex, but overall, yes.
Overall, yes. Because we're approaching, we have just 5 minutes, and I do want to hear your views on how should NATO's approach to partnership evolve towards 2030, and what priorities should drive NATO's agenda with respect to working with partners, because you come from different standpoints, or your countries of origin at least. So that, and then what else you would like to see more towards 2030? What are those elements of novelty that we could still bring into the conversation to make the alliance fit for current and future challenges? And I will start now in reverse order, maybe with you, Malcolm.
Yes, well, I would always return to this idea that we need to identify what are the interests of the NATO members, that NATO is not here to save the world and to become a global institution for the sake of it. It's just that the globe is encroaching in on what are the interests of NATO members. And so that's part of the reason for taking a more international approach. And it does need to come down to the basis for any effective alliance system, which is that there does have to be effective, sufficient military power, and that's certainly be something that NATO is working on in terms of defense budgets and so on. But also this other element, which is more directly related to our conversation about the rules-based order, which is that a clear sense of the values and the ideas of global governance, of liberal democracy, of human rights, that these are important to NATO members. And so that should be the basis for working with other partners. this isn't the only concept of how the world should be governed, but if it is one that the members of NATO hold close, which they do, that should become part of the global strategy. And that does have the further implication that it becomes absolutely critical that members of NATO reinforce these values at home. That the rules-based order starts at home, and we see democratic backsliding, and that becomes critical to geopolitics as well, to also make sure these things are bolstered at home in the members of NATO.
But what about the partners? Because we discussed about the NATO allies, and I'm just wondering, we have partners from all over the world. Would that stand the same, or should there be a different, more flexible approach?
Yes, I mean, yes, a more flexible approach. It, of course, assists that many of these key partners are very much sharing the values and the interests of NATO. So the partnerships that NATO already has, for instance, with Australia and New Zealand, countries who are facing the China challenge as a regional challenge, not just a global one, and are seeing that in a very direct way, forms of intervention by China within those countries, interference with political systems, for instance, those countries are strongly aligned with many of the global interests of China. And so there is this basis for working together because of shared democratic or human rights values. But I would also say that sometimes pragmatism is the most important thing in global affairs, and that when there are shared interests with other countries who perhaps don't have exactly aligned values, sometimes that's also appropriate for a global alliance who wishes to actually be effective and create more security and not just be making a political statement, for instance.
Annelie, same questions to you on the involvement of NATO's partnership or NATO's approach to partnership, and also if you could factor in the Sweden's increased defense spending and how that changes the equation towards a different type of approach from Sweden towards NATO.
Absolutely. Sweden is an enhanced opportunities partner, and sometimes we say it's the closest cousin you can get for NATO. And multilateralism matters for Sweden. It's the only way forward. We cannot live in a world where we have other states dictating spheres of influence. We have recently decided in the government of a new defense bill with a 40% increase of defense spending. It's the largest increase in 70 years. The reason why is because we have a changing security situation in our neighborhood. We are stating in this bill that we cannot say that a conflict cannot happen. A conflict may happen in Sweden or in our vicinity, and it's important to be prepared for that. So we're doing this bill in two ways. Our defense will continue to increase with operational capability, but it will also be a continued deepening of international relations with our partners, with Finland and the United States and the UK and the European Union, and with NATO as a partner, of course. And I think there's two things that we should continue to do from a partner's perspective. One is to continue to build interoperability. That raises the threshold in our region, and that means continuing to do large-scale exercises. From time to time, have some presence in the Baltic Sea region, and also understand that this sends security signals that we are working together and that we take our security situation seriously and we take responsibility for our neighborhood. And if we don't continue with these individual partnership programs, if we don't continue to work together, then I think everyone will lose.
So it seems that Sweden will remain one of the closest cousins that we can imagine. Ketevan, to you, what are the expectations from the Georgian side towards 2030? Should the partnership evolve into enlargement? What are the new ideas and the new expectations coming from your end? And we literally have a couple of minutes left.
Yes, of course, NATO is a political and military alliance, and this is the global organization, and that is why having a more global outlook is really important and crucial in building the partnership based on values, shared interests, and also probably the common threat perception is really crucial. In that regard, when we talk about NATO's global outlook, first, I think that we need to concentrate about the partnership and about building peace and security at home. And this is the Euro-Atlantic security environment first. And that is why I would once again, probably in conclusion, highlight the importance of building peace and security in the Black Sea, in the wider Black Sea region, and for which, and for this purpose, of course, NATO enlargement, open door policy, and bringing Georgia in NATO and membership of Georgia would be the crucial step in 2030. And I would wish after 10 years really to enjoy full membership for my country in the Alliance.
Thank you all very much for your thoughts. I think that there were no major disagreements. We all see a great role for NATO in upholding the international rules-based order with various flexible approaches depending on the corner of the world. I would like to invite everyone to join Channel 1 for Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger's final remarks to wrap up NATO Youth Summit. Thank you again to all three of you for your thoughts, and for those who stayed until now to follow us. And let's hope that in 2030 our house will be in a better order than today. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day.